The chamber was so large that clouds formed near its ceiling. Thousands of alien delegates sat in tiered rings that stretched upward like the inside of a hollow mountain, each species separated by color-coded light barriers that translated speech, filtered atmosphere, and kept the more aggressive races from lunging at their neighbors during heated debates. The Supreme Galactic High Council of the United Star Systems had been meeting in this chamber for over 4,000 years, and in all that time, not a single session had ever been interrupted by something as small, as young, or as frankly embarrassing as a request from Earth. Ambassador Lena Vasquez floated her transport pod to the speaking platform and let the docking clamps lock her in place. She was a small woman by human standards, 5'4", dark hair pulled back tight, wearing the deep blue uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Against the backdrop of the council, she looked like a pebble that had somehow wandered into a cathedral. The presiding elder of the council, a being called Vorontaith who was older than most human civilizations, looked down at her with the patient expression of someone who had agreed to listen to a child's complaint about a scraped knee. Vorontaith's species, the Ithori, were tall, silver-skinned, and possessed 6 eyes arranged in a crown around their skull. They communicated primarily through light pulses that rippled across their skin, but the translation systems rendered their speech as a deep, resonant hum that vibrated pleasantly in the chest. Earth Representative, Vorontaith said, "You have been granted 17 minutes of floor time. The Council recognizes your world's enthusiasm for participation. Please proceed." There was a ripple of something through the chamber. Not quite laughter. The Council was too dignified for laughter, but a shifting, a settling, the universal body language of people who have already decided they won't be impressed. Lena did not flinch. She had been a trauma surgeon before becoming a diplomat. She had delivered bad news in burning hospitals while the ground shook. Condescension from aliens who had never bled for anything was not going to rattle her. She activated her display. A holographic map of the outer Perseus arm bloomed into existence above the speaking platform, large enough for every delegate in the chamber to see clearly. Red indicators pulsed along a curving band of space that stretched across several hundred light years. "Counselors," she said, "Earth has been monitoring an anomalous gravitational signal originating from beyond the Varith boundary for the past 9 years. Our observatories, both ground-based and deep space, have tracked its movement, its growth, and its pattern. We have shared this data with the Council's Scientific Liaison Office on 6 separate occasions over the past 4 years. We have received 3 automated acknowledgments and no response." Another ripple through the chamber. A few delegates leaned toward their neighbors. Vorontaith's skin pulsed a brief amber, mild interest, the translation system noted in the corner of Lena's earpiece. "The signal," Lena continued, "is not natural. We are certain of this. Its pattern contains mathematical structures, prime-based sequences embedded in gravitational wave modulation, that cannot be produced by any stellar or cosmic phenomenon we know of. It is a signal from something that thinks, something very large, and it is moving toward the inner systems at approximately 0.3 light-years per standard cycle." She let that number sit. At 0.3 light-years per cycle, whatever was out there would reach the first inhabited systems of the United Star Systems in roughly 40 cycles, about 60 Earth years. A delegate from the Muir Collective, a species that resembled enormous crustaceans wrapped in magnetic fields, raised one of its 12 manipulator arms. "Ambassador," it said, voice rendered as a deep clicking sound, "Earth has been a registered observer world for less than 3 centuries. Your scientific infrastructure, while adequate for your developmental stage, lacks the sensitivity and analytical depth of established member civilizations. Is it not possible that what you have detected is simply a phenomenon your instruments are misinterpreting?" "We considered that," Lena said. "So we shared our raw data with the technocracy of Sivan, the Drethali Institute, and the Calorian Observatory Collective. All 3 independently confirmed our readings. I have their reports here." She pushed the files to the Council's data network. She watched the confirmation light blink on the presiding elder's console. Vorontaith looked at the files, then looked at Lena. The amber in its skin faded back to neutral silver. "These will be reviewed by the Council's Scientific Committee. We appreciate Earth's diligence. However, the Council must weigh many priorities, and a theoretical signal of uncertain origin does not at present warrant emergency deliberation. We will add this matter to the standard review queue. The standard review queue, Lena said carefully, currently has a processing time of how long? A junior council administrator, a small avian creature that served as Vorontaith's assistant, chirped something. The translation came through as approximately 31 cycles for non-priority submissions. 31 cycles. The thing in the dark would be halfway here before the council finished reading the report. Lena breathed once, slowly, the way she used to breathe before making the first incision in a surgery where the odds weren't good. Counselors, she said, I want to be clear about what Earth is telling you. We are not asking for resources. We are not asking for a military response. We are asking for a coordinated scientific investigation. We are asking you to look at what we have found and take it seriously before the window for preparation closes. Whatever is out there has already crossed 3 dead systems: Varith, 7, the Dorian cluster, and the Pelin remnants. We have compared gravitational readings from those systems over the past 2 centuries. The anomaly passed through each of them. None of those systems have sent any signal since. Dead silence in the chamber. The first real silence since she'd begun speaking. 3 systems, she said again. Quiet. No distress calls, no evacuation signals, no scientific transmissions. Just silence, after the anomaly passed through. Vorontaith's skin flickered, a fast, complex pattern that the translation system struggled with, finally rendering it as inconclusive. Systems in that region have historically low communication infrastructure. The Dorian cluster, Lena said, keeping her voice level, had a population of approximately 2 billion people. They had been a member civilization of this council for 800 years. They had 11 active relay stations and a communication traffic record going back 4 centuries. Their last recorded transmission was 214 years ago. I would like someone to explain to me why a civilization with 800 years of membership and 11 relay stations simply stopped talking. Nobody answered. Her 17 minutes were almost up. She could feel it in the way the chamber had begun its subtle, pre-transition shuffling. Delegates reaching for their next briefing materials, aides whispering to superiors. Earth will continue monitoring, she said. We will continue compiling data. We will continue sending reports through the appropriate channels. But I want this body to understand something. She looked up at Vorontaith directly, meeting all 6 of those ancient eyes without blinking. We are not warning you because we are afraid. We are warning you because that is what you do when you see something dangerous coming toward people who haven't noticed it yet. That is what humans do. We warn each other. We have done it for 100,000 years, through ice ages and plagues and wars, and every catastrophe this small planet has thrown at us. We are still here because we learned to listen to warnings. She paused. We are asking you to listen to this one. The chamber was quiet for exactly 2 more seconds. Then the session bell chimed. Her time was up, and the next item on the agenda, a trade dispute between the Muir Collective and the Sevan technocracy over mineral extraction rights in the Corvin Belt, was already being loaded onto the display screens. Lena released her pod from the docking clamps and floated back toward the observers' gallery. A few delegates glanced at her. Most did not. On the way out, a young Ithori aide caught up to her pod and pressed a data chip into her hand. It contained a single line of text and signed, "I read your reports. All 6 of them. You are not wrong. But no one here will move until they can see it themselves." Lena pocketed the chip. Back on Earth, the deep space arrays were already processing the latest data packet from the outer Perseus arm. The gravitational signal had grown stronger in the past 30 days. It was also no longer alone. There were now 3 distinct signatures moving in formation, patient, unhurried, enormous, through the dark between the stars. Nobody on the council knew that yet. Lena had decided to save it for the next report, the one she was already writing, for the 7th time, to a body that had already decided not to listen. She wondered how many times a person had to say something is coming before the people in the big chairs finally looked up. The 7th report sat in the council's inbox for 11 days before it was automatically flagged as a duplicate submission and moved to archive storage. No human saw it happen. The algorithm that made the decision was 400 years old and had been written by a species that no longer existed. It had never been updated because nothing in the council's history had ever required it to be updated. It worked perfectly for what it was designed to do, which was to prevent redundant paperwork from clogging the desks of busy administrators. It was not designed to recognize that the redundancy was itself the message. Lena found out about the archiving 3 weeks later, when she followed up with the scientific committee and was told, politely, that her submission had been consolidated with her previous 6 reports into a single reference file under the heading Earth. Ongoing gravitational anomaly observations. Non-priority. She asked who had made that determination. She was told it had been made automatically by the standard processing protocol. She asked if anyone on the scientific committee had actually read any of the 7 reports. There was a long pause on the communication line. Then the committee's administrative coordinator, a pleasant Sevan bureaucrat named Threel Vassis, told her that the committee had reviewed a summary prepared by a junior analyst. The summary was 2 paragraphs long. Lena thanked Threel Vassis and ended the call. Then she sat at her desk in the Earth Embassy on the Council station and did not speak for about 4 minutes. Her assistant, a young man named Kofi Mensah who had been with the diplomatic corps for 2 years and still believed in the fundamental reasonableness of interstellar institutions, eventually brought her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "They archived it," she said. "I heard," Kofi said. "The signal is now coming from 3 sources. Moving information. The mathematical structures in the signal have become more complex in the last 6 months. Not randomly more complex, systematically more complex, like something cycling through frequencies, searching for a response." And the Council's scientific committee read 2 paragraphs about it. Kofi wrapped both hands around his own coffee cup. "What do we do?" Lena had been thinking about that for 4 minutes. She had gone through the obvious answers and discarded them one by one. She could file a formal complaint, which would take 18 months to process. She could request an emergency session, which required the co-signature of 12-member civilizations, none of which had shown any interest in backing Earth's position. She could leak the data to the Galactic press, which would generate 3 days of speculation and then be buried under whatever trade dispute was trending that week. None of those were the answer. The answer was something she had been resisting because it meant admitting that the diplomatic route had failed, and Lena Vasquez did not like to admit that anything had failed while there were still options she hadn't tried. But she was running out of options she hadn't tried. "We go around them," she said. She didn't mean illegally. She meant something more interesting than illegal. She meant the thing that humans had always been surprisingly good at, which was talking to whoever would listen even when the people in charge had stopped listening. The Council was a body of governments. But the United Star Systems was also full of people, scientists, merchants, pilots, station workers, researchers, refugees, who were not governments and who did not have the luxury of ignoring things that were moving toward them at 0.3 light-years per cycle. She started with the scientists. The Calorian Observatory Collective had already confirmed Earth's readings. Their lead researcher, a being called Shunvaralath, was a 4-armed, deep violet creature who had dedicated the last century of its very long life to studying anomalous gravitational phenomena. When Lena contacted it directly, not through official channels, but through a personal communication frequency that Shunvaralath had given her after their last correspondence, it responded within the hour. "I have been waiting for someone to call me about this," Shunvaralath said. Its voice, even through the translation filter, carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had been right about something for a long time without being believed. "The committee reviewed my confirmation report. They sent me a form letter." "A form letter, Ambassador? I have been studying space for 90 years, and they sent me a form letter." "I know," Lena said. "I'd like to propose something. I'd like to organize an independent research consortium, scientists from member worlds who are willing to pool observations and produce a unified analysis that cannot be dismissed as a single civilization misreading. You would need at minimum 7 member world institutions to give it credibility," Shunvaralath said immediately, which told Lena it had already thought about this. "I have 3 confirmed," she said. "The Calorian Collective, the Drethalai Institute, and Earth's own Deep Space Network. Can you recommend 4 more?" "I can recommend 9 more," it said. "Some of them have been sitting on data they didn't know what to do with. They'll be grateful someone is asking." That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, the Independent Gravitational Anomaly Research Consortium had 14 member institutions from 11 different civilizations, a shared data network, a jointly authored preliminary report, and a name that was too long but that everyone agreed conveyed the appropriate seriousness. Lena let the scientists lead it. They were better at the credibility part. She handled the logistics, the communications, the gentle art of convincing 14 different research institutions with 14 different bureaucratic cultures to agree on a shared publication format. The consortium's first unified report was published through the standard scientific channels, peer-reviewed, fully sourced, with raw data attached. Exactly 42 days after Lena's conversation with Shunvaralath. It confirmed, in the measured and careful language of 14 independent scientific institutions, everything Earth had been saying for 9 years. The 3 anomalous signals were real. They were artificial. They were large. Estimates range from objects several kilometers across to structures that might be measured in hundreds of kilometers. They were moving in coordinated formation. And the silence of Varith 7, the Dorian cluster, and the Pelin remnants was real, consistent, and statistically impossible to explain as natural communication dropout. The report landed in the Council's inbox and was logged by the standard protocol. It was not archived. It was flagged for review. That was a step up. But it was also landing in the inboxes of 14 scientific institutions' public communication networks, which meant it was landing in front of the reading public of 11 civilizations, which meant it was landing in front of journalists. And journalists, Lena had learned, were the same everywhere in the galaxy. They had a very specific hunger for the story that the authorities had tried to quietly ignore. The report went wide within a week. Suddenly, everyone was talking about the 3 signals. Suddenly, people on stations and colony worlds and passenger liners crossing the Perseus Arm were asking their governments what they knew and what they were doing about it. The Council convened an extraordinary subcommittee meeting. They did not invite Earth. They did invite the Calorian Collective, the Drethalai Institute, and 8 of the other consortium members. Lena found this out from Shunvaralath, who attended the meeting, listened to 4 hours of internal deliberation, and transmitted Lena a summary afterwards that contained the phrase, "They are still hoping to avoid the word emergency." The subcommittee meeting produced a resolution. The resolution called for additional observation over the next 5 cycles, roughly 7 Earth years, before any formal determination of threat level would be made. It was a polite, carefully worded document that essentially said, "We acknowledge this might be a problem, and we will acknowledge it more officially in 7 years." Lena read the resolution. She calculated the approach speed of the 3 signals. She calculated how close they would be to inhabited space in 7 years. Then she sent the calculation to every journalist who had run the original story. The response was immediate and loud. But loud was not the same as action. The Council was ancient and bureaucratic and staffed by civilizations that had survived for thousands of years precisely by not panicking, and they had confused not panicking with not acting, and Lena was beginning to understand that no amount of noise from the public was going to move this body until it had something it could not process as abstract. She needed to give them something concrete. She didn't have to wait long. 8 days after the subcommittee resolution, the relay station at the edge of the Corvin Belt, not in the path of the signals, just adjacent to the region, went silent mid-transmission. The message it had been sending was a routine cargo manifest from a freighter company. It cut off at the word shipment and did not resume. Lena was the first diplomat to file an official incident report. She filed it within 3 hours of the silence being confirmed. She cross-referenced it to all 7 of Earth's previous submissions, to the consortium report, and to the 3 systems whose silence she had mentioned in the Council chamber. This time, nobody archived it. This time, someone at the Council read it the same day it arrived. Lena didn't know that yet. She was already working on the next step, the one she had been quietly preparing for 6 months. The step that went past science, past journalism, past official reports, and into the territory of simple, undeniable physical demonstration. She had a ship. She had a crew of 9 volunteers. She had a flight plan into the outer Perseus Arm. And she had a question she intended to answer herself, because clearly nobody else was going to go out there and look. The ship was called the Meridian, and it was not a warship. It was a long-range survey vessel, boxy, practical, painted in the faded orange and gray of the Earth Exploration Authority, with enough fuel for a 14-month deep space transit, a sensor package that Lena had spent 4 months negotiating upgrades for, and a crew of 9 people who had all read the same reports she had and come to the same conclusion. If no one was going to look, then someone had to go look. The Council did not sanction the mission. They also did not stop it, because stopping it would have required acknowledging the mission existed, which would have required discussing why a human ambassador was personally flying into the outer Perseus arm to investigate a potential existential threat that the Council had spent years filing into the non-priority queue. That was a conversation the Council preferred not to have. So they said nothing, which Lena had anticipated and used accordingly. She had, however, told the press exactly where they were going and why. The Meridian launched from Earth's Deep Space Station on a Wednesday morning with 17 different journalists' cameras pointed at it. Lena stood in the observation bay and watched the station shrink behind them and felt something settle in her chest. The particular feeling of a decision made completely, with no more room for second-guessing. Whatever was out there, they were going to see it. Whatever it had done to the Dorian cluster and the Pellan remnants and the Corvin relay station, they were going to find the evidence. The crew was unusual for a diplomatic mission. There was Dr. Yusuf Abra, Earth's leading expert in non-terrestrial signal analysis, a man so obsessively focused on his work that he sometimes forgot to eat for 2 days straight and seemed genuinely unbothered by this. There was Commander Priya Subramaniam, a former deep space rescue pilot who had spent 12 years flying into places where things had gone wrong, and who approached the concept of danger with the same calm practicality she applied to everything else. There were also 3 specialists loaned from consortium member institutions, a calorian sensor technician, a Drethaline materials analyst, and a young Sevan physicist named Veltharuan, who was 3 decades old by their species' reckoning, barely past adolescence, but who had written the most precise mathematical analysis of the signal patterns that anyone had produced so far, and who had volunteered for the mission without hesitation. They transited for 41 days before reaching the edge of the region where the Pellan remnants had once been a thriving civilization of 600 million people. Dr. Abra was the first to process the sensor data from the remnant zone. He sat with it for 6 hours before calling the crew together. When he spoke, his voice was the particular flat calm of a scientist who has found something so far outside expected parameters that the emotions haven't caught up yet. "There is nothing wrong with the stars here," he said. "The planets are intact. The asteroid fields are intact. The physical infrastructure of this system, the stations, the orbital platforms, the surface structures, it's all intact. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was burned or broken or blown apart." He paused. "It's all empty. The structures are standing and the ships are still docked and the lights are still on in some of the orbital platforms because the automated systems are still running. But there are no people, no bodies, no biological material at all. 600 million people, and there is no trace that any living thing was ever here except the things they built." The room was quiet. "The Dorian cluster was the same?" Commander Subramaniam asked. "Based on what we can detect from here, yes. Same pattern." Veltharuan, the young Sevan physicist, was the one who asked the question everyone was thinking. What removes all biological material and leaves everything else perfectly intact? Nobody had an answer. Not yet. They spent 11 days in the Pellan system, collecting everything they could. Dr. Abra ran continuous sensor sweeps. The Drethaline materials analyst, whose name translated roughly as Deep Stone Patience, ran atmospheric samples from the orbital platforms and found them normal. The right mix of gases, no toxins, no radiation above background levels, no chemical trace of any substance that might explain mass death or disappearance. The structures were clean, dusty in places, because automated cleaning systems had apparently not been maintained after the people operating them had gone, but otherwise just empty, waiting, like a stage set between performances. On the 9th day, Dr. Abra found something in the signal archive of a communications relay that was still broadcasting on automatic cycle. The relay was still recording and storing incoming transmissions, as it was designed to do. Most of what it had recorded in the last 2 centuries was cosmic background noise. But 173 years ago, it had recorded something that had arrived from the direction of the outer Perseus arm. The relay had cataloged it as unidentified signal, unknown origin, unknown format, and stored it without processing it, because there was nobody left to process it. Abra spent 36 hours on it. Veltharuan spent 36 hours on it beside him. What they found was not a message, exactly. It was more like a notice. The mathematical structure was different from the moving signals Lena's team had been tracking. This was simpler, shorter, more direct. It took them a long time to parse the logic of the encoding, but when they did, the meaning was approximately this. Asterisk this space is now allocated. Biological substrate material has been collected. The process is complete. Next allocation will proceed on the attached schedule. Asterisk, there was a schedule attached. It was expressed in a mathematical time encoding system that Veltharuan worked on for 4 more days. When they cracked it, they found a list of coordinates and corresponding time markers. The Dorian cluster was on the list. Time marker, consistent with their communication silence 214 years ago. The Corvin relay station was on the list. Time marker, 8 days ago. And then more coordinates. Dozens more. Systems throughout the inner arm. Member civilizations of the United Star Systems. The schedule marched forward in time with the same indifferent regularity as a shipping timetable. Systems marked for allocation. Populations marked for collection. Lena looked at the list. She didn't feel panic. She had a surgeon's relationship with terrible information. You receive it, you process it, you act. What she felt was a cold, focused clarity. Send this, she said. Everything. Raw data, our analysis, the schedule, all of it. Send it to every council member, every scientific institution, every press outlet, every government. Encrypt nothing. Redact nothing. Send it to everyone simultaneously so nobody can sit on it. The council will be furious, Kofi said from the communications station. Yes, Lena said. Good. She recorded a message to go with the data. She kept it short. She said, asterisk, we went to the Pelin remnants. We found what happens after the signals pass through. We found a schedule. Your civilization may be on it. Attached is everything we know. We are returning to the inner systems. We suggest the council convene immediately. Asterisk, she did not say we told you. She had thought about it. She decided it was less important than being useful. The transmission went out. In the 17 hours it took to reach the inner systems relay network, Lena's crew began the transit home. Veltharuan continued working on the schedule, refining the time markers. Deepstone patients ran a materials analysis on a strange residue it had found on one of the Pelin orbital platforms. A thin, even coating on all biological contact surfaces, like every handrail and seat and floor panel. That was unlike anything in its database. On the transit home, on the 33rd day, the 3 signals that Earth had been tracking for 9 years changed course. They had been heading for the inner systems in a broad, unhurried sweep. Now they adjusted. The adjustment was small, a fraction of a degree, but Abra ran the new trajectory 11 times because he didn't trust the result. Every time, it came out the same. The 3 signals were now heading directly for the location of the meridian. They know we're here, Subramaniam said. They knew we were here before we got here, Abra said. I think they're responding to the transmission. I think they heard us broadcast. Lena stood at the forward observation window and looked at the dark between the stars. The meridian was a small ship. The things out there, she still didn't know what to call them, had crossed hundreds of light years and processed 600 million people without leaving a scratch on the infrastructure. She thought about what a surgeon does when the situation is worse than expected. You don't freeze. You adjust the plan. You use what you have. How long until they reach intercept range? She asked. At current speed, Abra said, 11 days. Then we have 11 days to be more useful than we are right now. She turned from the window. Veltharuan, the signal encoding they used in the Pelin archive. Is it a language? The young physicist looked up from their console. It has structural properties consistent with language, yes. Can you write something in it? A long pause. Possibly. With time. You have 11 days, Lena said. Let's find out if they respond to someone talking back. Behind them, 8 light hours away, the council's emergency session was being called to order for the first time in 300 years. The chamber that had watched Lena Vasquez float in on a transport pod and speak for 17 minutes was now full of delegates who had read her transmission, seen the schedule, and discovered that their own coordinates appeared in it with markers between 40 and 90 years from now. The trade dispute about the Corvin Belt mineral rights had been quietly removed from the agenda. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody was likely to mention it for quite some time. Vorin Taith called the session to order with a gravity it had not used in centuries, and the first item it placed before the council was the matter of contacting the human ambassador currently aboard a small orange ship that was, According to the latest tracking data, approximately 11 days from an intercept with 3 unidentified objects of unknown capability. The Council voted to open communications with the Meridian immediately. It was the first unanimous vote of the emergency session. It was also the first time the Council had called Earth, rather than the other way around. The Council's transmission reached the Meridian on day 3 of the 11-day window. Lena was in the ship's small lab, watching Veltharoon work, when Kofi called her to the communications deck. The signal carried the full ceremonial header of the Supreme Galactic High Council of the United Star Systems, the layered authentication codes, the official seal in 7 frequencies, all the digital weight of 4,000 years of institutional gravity. And Vorontaith's voice on the other end of it sounded, for the first time in all of Lena's experience with the presiding elder, like something was sitting on its chest. Ambassador Vasquez, it said, the Council has reviewed your transmission in full. An emergency session has been convened. We are requesting your immediate return to Council Station and your participation in crisis deliberation. Lena looked at Kofi, who was watching her with an expression that said this is what we wanted, and also be careful. She keyed the response channel. Presiding Elder, she said, I appreciate the Council's urgency. However, the Meridian is currently 11 days from a possible intercept with the signals we've been tracking. I have a physicist aboard who is attempting to decode their communication structure. Retreating at this moment would mean abandoning the only direct contact opportunity we are likely to have before these objects reach inhabited space. I intend to stay on course. The pause before Vorontaith's response was longer than light delay could account for. You intend to approach them. I intend to be in a position to communicate with them, yes. Everything we know about their behavior suggests they are methodical, not violent. They don't destroy infrastructure. They don't fire weapons. They do something precise and biological and clearly intentional, which means they have intentions, which means there may be a way to change their intentions, which means someone needs to talk to them. We are currently the most positioned to do that. Another long pause. Ambassador, the Meridian is a survey vessel. I know what it is, Lena said. It's also the only ship in this region with a person aboard who can partially read their encoding. That's not nothing. Veltharoon, who had been listening while working, tilted their head in the Sevan gesture that meant something between that is accurate, and please don't oversell it. Lena noted this and adjusted. Veltharoon has identified approximately 60% of the structural grammar of the signals. It's enough to attempt basic communication. Not complex language, but mathematics is mathematics everywhere, and a civilization that sends schedules in prime-based encoding understands abstraction. We can work with abstraction. The Council response this time came with other voices behind Vorontaith, delegates, probably, gathered around the transmission console. The Elder said, what are you proposing to communicate to them? Lena had thought about this for 3 days. She had discussed it with the crew. She had argued with Abra at 2 a.m. over black coffee. She had listened to Veltharoon's technical constraints and Dr. Deepstone Patient's quiet, steady observations about what the biological residue on the Pelon platforms might tell them about the process the signals used. She had pieced together what they knew and decided that the only message worth sending was the one that challenged the fundamental logic of what these things were doing. They think of biological life as a resource to be collected, she said. Their schedule is a resource extraction schedule. They've been doing it to uncontacted systems because uncontacted systems can't argue. We're going to argue. Argue. Vorontaith repeated. We're going to tell them that the biological substrate they are collecting is not inert material, that it is organized, self-aware, capable of building things, solving things, growing, and that destroying that organizational complexity is less efficient than any alternative they might consider. We're going to make an economic argument to something that thinks in terms of schedules and allocations. On the Council Station, 7 light hours away, Vorontaith's skin was doing something its aides had never seen in their lifetimes of service. A rapid, complex pattern that the translation system rendered haltingly as something close to reluctant recalibration of assumptions. Ambassador, it said at last, the Council will do something it has not done in its history. We are placing the response to this situation in the hands of an Earth representative. We will support you with every resource we can mobilize. 12 member civilizations have pledged warships, but we agree they are likely irrelevant against these objects. The scientific consortium has been granted full council status for the duration of this crisis. Whatever you need, whatever you ask for, you have it. What do we do? Lena was quiet for a moment. Outside the forward window, the meridian hummed through the dark, still days from anything visible, still alone in the silence between stars. She thought about all the reports she had written, all the acknowledgments she had received, all the times she had stood in front of a chamber and said something is coming and watched people file it in the non-priority queue. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt the same thing she had always felt, which was the weight of a problem that needed solving. "Get me the best xenolinguists in the council archives," she said. "All of them, live consultation, I don't care what time it is in their home systems. Get me the full historical record of every contact event the council has ever logged. I want to know if anyone has ever successfully renegotiated terms with a non-biological intelligence. Get Veltharoon access to the Ithori Mathematical Linguistics Database, the one your species developed for deep structure encoding. I know it exists because your delegate mentioned it at the first contact symposium 6 years ago. And get me a secure channel to Earth, because I want to talk to the team that has been running the observatory network for the past 9 years. They know this signal better than anyone alive." Orders started moving. Lena could hear it, the particular sound of a large institution shifting from stillness to motion, the change in background noise as aids started moving, channels started opening, the machine of the council beginning to point itself at the problem with the full weight of 4,000 years of collective infrastructure. It was, she thought, exactly what it should have done 9 years ago. But she put that away. There was no useful future in it. On day 7, Veltharoon had a working draft of a message. It was built from the prime sequence encoding they had identified in the Pelin archive, supplemented with mathematical structures borrowed from the Ithori Deep Linguistics Database, and its core argument was expressed not in words but in an equation, a compact, elegant mathematical proof that demonstrated the difference in information complexity between unorganized matter and organized biological civilization. It said, in the most fundamental language of abstraction possible, what you are collecting is worth more uncollected. They sent it at maximum signal strength on day 8. Then they waited. On day 9, the 3 objects slowed. It was not a dramatic stop. It was a deceleration, gradual, precise, controlled. The Meridian sensors tracked it in real time, and Abra ran the numbers 4 times before he announced it, because he didn't want to say the wrong thing. But the numbers were consistent. The 3 objects had been at 0.3 light-years per cycle. Now they were decelerating. They would still reach intercept range, but they would reach it at a fraction of their previous velocity. "They heard us," Subramaniam said. "They're responding," Veltharoon said, and their hands were already moving across the console because the sensors had picked up a return signal. In the same prime sequence encoding, more complex than anything in the Pelin archive, structured in a way that Veltharoon immediately identified as an expansion of the mathematical framework from the message the Meridian had sent. They were not just responding. They were answering in the language they had been sent, which meant they had parsed it, which meant they understood it, which meant the conversation was real. It took Veltharoon and the assembled xenolinguists 18 hours to fully decode the response. When they did, the message was not warm. It was not hostile either. It was, and this was the word Veltharoon used after sitting with it for a long time, administrative, like a form being processed. It said approximately, * the claim of organized complexity is noted. Classification is under review. Allocation is suspended pending assessment. Transmit proof of classification criteria. * They want us to prove it, Kofi said. They want us to prove we're worth more than the material we're made of, Lena said. Which is, coincidentally, something humans have been arguing since the beginning of recorded history. We know how to do this. What followed was something that had no real precedent in galactic history. Over the next 19 days, with the 3 objects holding position at a fixed distance that felt deliberately chosen, neither threatening nor retreating, the Meridian transmitted. They transmitted mathematics, the history of science across 14 civilizations, architectural designs, medical discoveries, musical compositions rendered in frequency patterns, the recorded history of every civilization in the United Star Systems, the philosophical traditions of 47 species, the solutions to problems that had taken centuries to crack. They transmitted the fact of language itself, The concept that the same idea could be expressed in 10,000 different ways across 10,000 different cultures and still point at the same truth. The council sent everything it had. Scientists and historians and artists and engineers across 11 civilizations contributed to the transmission in what became, improbably, the largest collaborative act in the history of the United Star Systems. A species-wide argument, made to something that collected populations like a farmer harvests grain, that the harvest was the wrong choice. On the 22nd day after the first exchange, the three objects transmitted a final message. Asterisk organized biological complexity, confirmed. Extraction inefficiency, acknowledged. Allocation reclassified, observe and non-interfere. Dorian and Pellan substrate, collection irreversible. Ongoing collection suspended. Schedule void. Encounter logged. Departure, immediate. Asterisk, and then they left. The sensors tracked the three signatures turning, accelerating, retreating back into the dark of the outer Perseus arm. Within 6 days, they were beyond detection range. Within 3 weeks, there was no trace of them in any frequency. The Meridian returned to Council Station on a quiet morning, undramatic in the way that true exhaustion is undramatic. Lena docked at the Earth Embassy Bay and sat for a while before standing up. The crew moved around her, some of them already on calls, some of them very still. Veltharoon sat in the back of the bay and was quietly, apparently, crying, seething grief response, which took the form of a harmless bioluminescent weeping that turned the air around them faintly gold. 2 civilizations were gone. The Dorian cluster and the Pellan remnants would never come back. Their infrastructure stood in empty systems, maintained by automated systems that had no one left to serve. Lena had thought about them every day for 3 weeks and had not stopped thinking about them and did not expect to stop for a long time. Vorontaith met her at the docking bay. It stood without its delegation, without aides, without the full ceremonial weight of its office. Just the elder, alone, in a corridor that smelled of recycled air and ship fuel. Its skin was a quiet, deep blue, which the translation system, after a moment, rendered as something close to shame. Ambassador Vasquez, it said. Presiding elder, she said. A silence. Then, what Earth told us. 9 years ago, and the 6 times after. We chose. I know, Lena said. I know what you chose. There are no words. Then don't use words, she said. Not harshly. Just plainly. Change the queue. Change the protocol. Build a system that routes warnings from small civilizations to actual people who will read them the same day they arrive. Make it impossible for a report to be archived before a human being, or an Ithori, or a Sevan, or any thinking being has looked at it. That's what you can do. Vorontaith was quiet for a long moment. Its skin moved through several colors and settled on something the translation system had never had to render before. It tried 3 words and discarded them and finally said, "It will be done. The protocol will carry Earth's name, so that no one forgets where the warning came from." Lena looked at the elder. She thought about 9 years of reports. She thought about 2 billion people who had simply ceased to exist because no one had moved fast enough, looked early enough, listened to the small voice saying something is coming before the something arrived. She thought about what humans had always known, from the first time someone climbed a hill and saw the fire on the horizon and ran back to tell the village. A warning is only useful if someone receives it. Don't name it after Earth, she said. Name it after the Dorian cluster, after the Pellan remnants. Name it after the people who didn't get the warning in time. That way, every time someone sees the protocol, they'll remember what ignoring it costs. Vorontaith inclined its head. All 6 eyes closed briefly, the Ithori gesture of acceptance, of a thing received and kept. Behind Lena, through the bay window, the stars were the same as they had always been, cold, remote, indifferent to the small dramas of thinking creatures trying to survive in the space between them. But somewhere in the outer Perseus arm, 3 enormous objects were retreating, and the schedule they had carried was void, and the civilizations they had listed on it were still alive. Because someone had written a report, and then written it again, and then again, and eventually got on a small orange ship and gone to look herself. Because looking is what you do when the alternative is not knowing. Earth's seat on the council was upgraded to full voting membership the following week. The motion was unanimous and took 4 minutes. It was the fastest vote in 4,000 years of council history.